planning your dream whale watching adventure. Join the bucket list accountant himself, David Patterson, as we discuss planning and experiencing bucket list travel adventures. Learn how to financially prepare for your dream trips, discover strategies to disconnect from work and fully enjoy the experience, and gain insights on budgeting for expected and unexpected opportunities along the way. This episode provides practical steps to make your bucket list adventures both achievable and memorable. I'm your co-host Anthony Pearl. Let's get into making your bucket list happen. Hello, David, and it's great to be back picking up the podcast after a little break, and it's the break that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be back to do the next session, Anthony. Looking forward to it.
I think this is important for everyone listening. You've been living the bucket list dream because you've ticked one off the list. And we're going to talk a little bit about that whole process of getting on your list in the first place, but then more importantly, living that actual dream.
Yeah, absolutely. So mid-July, my wife and I headed off on our holiday. We went to the Head of the Bight in South Australia, which is a really sort of well-known whale nursery. My wife, Tammy's a whale enthusiast. I've been calling her a whale nutter, which I need to apologise to her at some stage. Someone pointed out to me enthusiast is a much better word, so I'm trying to build that in whenever I can.
You're doing it publicly now, so all is forgiven.
Yes, absolutely. So she's been a whale enthusiast probably since about 2017. Where we live in Warrnambool, there's a whale nursery here as well. So she's gotten right into it. So this holiday was probably more a bucket list item for her, but because of her enthusiasm, and it's a place I've always wanted to go. So we headed off to the Head of the Bight, which is about 2 hours east of the Western Australian, South Australian border. And we did that in the first couple of weeks in July. And we got to experience the whales over there, which I think when we were there were 30 to 40 whales at the Head of the Bight. We were able to do a plane flight over the top so we could see the cliffs and the sand dunes and the whales. And it was absolutely spectacular. And whilst I'm not as keen on the whales as what Tammy is, the fact that there were so many there and the destination we were at, I found myself sitting there for quite a few hours just watching them and observing. It was a great trip.
I can imagine. Every time I hear about whales, I just think of the Seinfeld episode. So for those that are in Seinfeld enthusiasts, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about with George plucking the Titleist golf ball out of the whale. But I'm sure you didn't get that opportunity. I'm sure you weren't firing golf balls off into the ocean and nor standing quite that close to them either.
No, but it's the one thing, because of the sheer cliff faces that are there, where you stand and watch them, it almost felt like they were only like 30 or 40 meters away. They came up really, really close, and it was a really good opportunity to sort of observe how they interact. And at the same time, it was ticking one of our bucket list holidays off the list. So that just made it a little bit more special, I think, too.
Yeah, well, I want to get into some details of it all. I'm keen to hear about it all in the context of the bucket list, but I have to ask one question as well. You know, you're standing there and looking, as you say, it feels like they're only a short distance away. Do you get a concept of how big and amazing these creatures are?
Big and amazing and just graceful. Like, they're not fast movers through the water, but they just sort of, they're in their environment and they're looking after their calves at the same time. And to see that, nurturing is probably not the right word, but they're very protective of them, and the playfulness of the calves so close when they breach and all of the like. It's something about whale. I think it's, whales and dolphin and marine life in general. It's really special when you can get up close to them like that. Even when you're not as enthusiastic as your wife might be, it's still a really special moment to be that close to them.
I think what's really interesting here is that, firstly, you talk about the enthusiasm of your wife versus your own. But then, that's the great thing about any relationship, isn't it? The enthusiasm of one can rub off on the other. And it's an important thing to acknowledge when you're creating a bucket list.
Oh, absolutely. As a couple, we certainly have mutual interests, but we've also got sort of separate interests that we both have. And I mean, for me, I'd always, well, when I say always, probably for the last 10 years, I've wanted to get to the Head of the Bight. Just for me, it seems like an iconic little part of Australia. And so when Tammy kind of put the proposal to me to say, hey, how about we do this trip? Because it's a lot of driving from Warrnambool to the Head of the Bight, but it's the only way to really get there. So when she suggested let's do it, it was kind of like, yeah, absolutely. It was initially I thought of it more of as a holiday for her. But as we started to plan it and book in and have destinations along the way and destinations back, I mean, I got as much enjoyment out of it as she did, no doubt. But it did take some planning too, like I said, it's a long trip. So we had to make sure that there were destinations along the way that we could stop at that had some attractions that we wanted to look at. So it wasn't a case of just packing up the car and heading off. We certainly had a plan in mind where we wanted to go and everything else.
I think it's something that people forget about when they're planning these sorts of things is that it is not just about the final destination. It is about the journey there and the journey that begins in the planning phase, not just in the actual, okay, now got the car packed and we're on our way.
Oh, absolutely. And credit to Tammy. She did most of the work on the itinerary, I guess, as to where we were going. But when you sit back and go, let's go to the head of the Bight, that's great. But I think it was about 1,900 kilometres to get there and then 1,900 kilometres back. So it was important that we broke that trip up as much as possible. So finding destinations along the way that had points of interest for us as well was important. That took some planning and seeing where things were and breaking up the trip so that we weren't sort of worn out by the time we got to where we were going. And we got to see some stuff that we probably didn't know existed along the way. So I think there was a windmill. You see him in one spot, which I'd never heard of before. And just to experience the different scenery as well was pretty awesome.
And it's interesting when you talk about that experience of 1900 Ks there and back, because that can be daunting. And you can be thinking about, oh, I just want to get there. And it's a bit like the flights when you're going overseas, right? Particularly if you're going to Europe, it's a long time in the plane. How do you make the most of that as part of it and make that part of the bucket list enjoyment, not just, oh no, we've got to sit in the car for how many hours? I don't know how many hours of driving 1900 Ks is, but it's a lot.
It was a lot. And I've spoken to a few people about the trip, and some people can, drive for 11 hours in a day and get there a lot quicker than what we did. But it was just as important for us to enjoy the journey as it was to enjoy the destination. So, we could have missed a few sites that we saw that if we had to just put our head down and driven, we would have missed out on. So, and just staying in different places and experiencing different sort of areas, I think is just as important as getting to where you want to get to and doing that part of it and then just getting home again. I mean, the driving along there is long, straight roads with the scenery changes a little bit, but it stays fairly similar the whole way through. But at no point was I finding myself weary or just wishing to get to where I was getting to. It was a matter of just enjoying what was around us and the difference to where we are and what we've got. So there was plenty of things to see and do along the way.
I think it is, isn't it? It's when you make that decision that you're having a holiday, make it something where you can switch off and enjoy that. Part of the great thing about driving is that you don't have time to worry about work. I mean, yes, you could potentially get a phone call,
Yeah.
but it's not that easy when you're driving. So particularly when you're driving somewhere that you've never been before and that you're wanting to take in and absorb the scenery along the way and plan where the next stop is for, even if it's just to get some lunch.
Yeah.
That's part of the enjoyment of it all. And so I think that's an important aspect, isn't it, of when you're creating, a holiday as part of the bucket list is you got to make sure you can switch off, even if it means forcing yourself to do it because you're in a car driving.
100%. I think the switching off is really important to enable you to sort of be in the holiday and just enjoying the holiday. And you're right, I was receiving a few phone calls along the way, but I made a conscious decision not to answer calls as I was driving along because, I was on holidays. So my message when they went through to voicemail was set up so that they knew I was on holidays. I had all my emails set up so that when they sent an email, the response went back that I was on holidays. So I'd set everything up that allowed people to understand that while I didn't take their call, the reason I didn't take their call or answer their email immediately was because I was on holidays and really wanted to enjoy the fact that I was on holidays. The early days of running my own business, it would take me several days to kind of wind into a holiday because I was sort of still stressing about this and the other thing and taking phone calls and answering emails. So I've made a conscious decision. Last year in September, we went to Vietnam and it was a conscious decision again. I'd set everything up properly, but my thing now is that if I'm going on holidays, I'm going to be on holidays. There might be a couple of emergencies that pop up, but on the whole, probably 98% of phone calls and emails can wait for a week or 2 weeks. It's not the end of the world. So since I've made that kind of conscious decision to enjoy my holidays and my breaks, I found it a lot easier to switch off. And then when I get back, just switch back on again. So it's just allowed for a greater sense of holiday, so I'm not using the first 2 days to unwind and then the last 2 days to sort of gear up again. I'm using the whole period of time to be on holiday.
This podcast is brought to you by bucketlistakcounting.com.au. Speak to David Patterson and his team if you want to take better control of your life and business, helping small business owners like you be successful designing the life of your dreams. Go to bucketlistakcounting.com.au or check out the show notes for more information. Now back to the program. If you go to the effort of creating a bucket list, whether it's a holiday over a few weeks or whether it's a simple event. I know for example, you climbed the Harbour Bridge as one of your bucket list things that we've talked about before. And that might just be something that takes a few hours, but you want to be in that moment. You don't want it to be to outside influences to take away from that enjoyment of something you've worked towards.
100%. And the Harbour Bridge climb in particular, I actually put my phone onto airplane mode so that I couldn't get disturbed while I was doing the walk. And it certainly allowed me just then to enjoy the climb, enjoy the scenery, and just sort of be present for the whole thing without, worrying about my phone buzzing in my pocket or out taking a photo and having a text message pop up or anything like that. It literally allowed me to just really enjoy those 2 hours. And then, deal with, once you get back off the bridge, take it off airplane mode, and whatever's popped up, you can then deal with it at a time that's convenient for you, not the other way around.
I want to also ask you about the planning phase for doing something like this trip. There's a lot of things to take into consideration in terms of the financial aspect of it, right? It's one thing planning all of the destinations, but there's, I imagine in a trip like this, there's costs of maintenance for the car and making sure that you've, doing all the checks and balances before you head off on a journey like that. There's the petrol costs. There's food costs along the way. There's accommodation costs along the way. Then there's tours and things and stuff that you think, well, you didn't, there's an unplanned element, isn't there? Because there's always something that pops up and go, oh, I didn't know we could do this, so let's do this.
Yeah.
And that feeds into it as well. So there's quite a bit of planning that needs to be involved in making sure that the experience that you're going to have on something that you have put on a bucket list is going to be able to be fulfilled with as maximum capacity as you can have.
Oh, absolutely. And especially, I guess, on a trip like we've just done where there's a lot of nothingness in between stops in a lot of cases. So, and you're right, the cost of diesel as you're driving along, and a couple of times I just had to close my eyes and wait till it was filled and then just go and pay because it just sort of the numbers scared you a little bit. But it's all part of the holiday, like you say. And so we kind of mapped out early on where we wanted to go and got a feel for how much accommodation was. And we did have to plan for things like food. We stayed at a place called Fowler's Bight, which is pretty isolated, no shops. I think it's got a population of 16 permanent residents. So we had to get food and have the ability to store it for 4 or 5 hours as we were getting to there from the place where we picked up the food. We had to plan where we would stop for diesel so that we didn't run out partway through. So we had a really good idea of how much the trip was going to cost, and we had a good idea of that relatively early. So again, we were allowed to sort of put money aside to cover all that, and then to have money aside for a couple of unexpected things that popped up along the way. We did a little 45-minute plane flight when we were at the head of the Bight, which we didn't know was an option. I think we discovered that as we were driving to the destination, but we'd factored in a little pool of money for unexpected events that we could do. So we were able to take that 45-minute flight without worrying about how much it was going to cost and just be able to enjoy it. So it just makes the trip as an accountant from a financials perspective a lot less stressful because before you head off that you've got everything covered.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being in a moment in a holiday and seeing something that you really want to do and then realizing we didn't plan for this.
Yep.
It is. So planning for the unexpected is an important aspect of it.
It is, I think in the past for us, we've had on a trip something that's popped up that's unexpected, like the flight, but we haven't factored it in before. So there's an element of, crikey, that's costing a lot. Can we afford it? Then doing it, but then while you're doing it, you're still kind of stressing about how much it cost. So it takes away an element of the enjoyment of the actual experience. Whereas this time, and the trip to Vietnam as well, we kind of had this bucket of money that we'd set aside for unexpected events, which then meant you could just do it and enjoy it and not worry about the cost. You could just get in and enjoy it and be part of it for the whole time. It just makes it more enjoyable.
A message as well for people listening is that you should be turning to someone like David to plan these kinds of things and to realize that there are things like that you want to make sure that you're planning for the unplanned and you've accommodated everything along the way so that you can achieve the bucket list item and do it with maximum enjoyment. Make it something that you are talking actively to your accountant about.
Absolutely. And having a feel for the types of things that you want to do. I mean, I've got a chalkboard behind me here, and it's got our next 4 holiday destinations mapped out and the times and dates that we want to take them. So, we're starting to plan well in advance because a couple of the trips are fairly expensive, but we're giving ourselves plenty of time to do some research on how much it's going to cost, what time of year we want to take it so that we can maximize the enjoyment of the trip, but also give us plenty of time to be able to save for it. So, we've set up a separate holiday bank account. And so money's going to there every week to build up for these trips. And then it also gives us plenty of time for sort of impromptu trips along the way if something pops up. But what it's doing is it's giving us a really clear direction of where we want to go and what it's going to take for us to get there, and enough time to put steps in place that allow us to do it.
I love as well that you've got it on the chalkboard. It doesn't mean you rub it off as soon as you've achieved one of the things because you want to bask in that glory for some time to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So the head of the Bight's up there and it's ticked. I haven't sort of made a decision of when it's going to come off yet. Every morning when you've come into the office and see that you've done it, it just puts a smile on your face every day when I'm popping in at the minute to work. So it'll probably stay there for a little while.
Now, just to wrap up this discussion, there's one important thing that I have to ask. 1,900 Ks there and back, lots of time in the car. What's on the playlist?
What's on the play? Well, that's an interesting. We didn't have anything. We didn't play radio. We didn't play music. There was 4 of us in the car, and there was just no music at all. There was large moments of silence. The people in the back kind of had to put their own kind of music on. I did all the driving, which was a conscious decision because it gave me much more leg room and space. But it was just about taking in the scenery and the destination. So normally we would music or the radio on all the time, driving to Melbourne. But it just kind of felt right that we didn't have anything and we were just sort of seeing what was around us.
The truth is, David, the kids in the back, they were listening to the Bucket List Accountant podcast on repeat continuously, right?
Well, I guess that's what it should have been. Yeah, you're right. Maybe from the next trip to Japan next year, I might grab them all and put them on a loop and get Tammy to listen to them all as we're traveling around.
Well, in that case, if you are listening in, Tammy, to this one, very nice to have shared a bit of the memory of this particular trip, and I hope you're enjoying the next one. So, David, thanks for this. I think it was a great insight into this particular holiday and what ticking off a bucket list item is all about.
Brilliant. Thanks for allowing me to share too.
The Bucket List Accountant podcast is brought to you by David Patterson and his team at Bucket List Accountant. Go and visit their website for more information, details of course in the show notes. I'm Anthony Pearl, your host from Podcast Done For You. We look forward to having your company in the next episode.